The sun cast a golden hue over the small living room as young Marilyn carefully arranged her dolls, pretending they were a bride and groom. Her mother's voice, soft yet firm, floated through the air. Marilyn's father burst through the door, his face flushed with anger. "How many times do I have to tell you to keep quiet when I'm working?" he snapped, glaring at her mother. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken resentment. Marilyn's mother, a woman of fragile beauty, flinched, but said nothing, her eyes cast downward. This was not an unfamiliar scene. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the arguments grew more frequent, more intense. Her father's harsh words, his constant criticism, chipped away at her mother's spirit. Marilyn often found herself hiding behind the sofa, clutching her dolls, her heart pounding in her chest as she listened to the heated exchanges. One evening, the argument reached a fever pitch. "I've had enough of your nagging," her father shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You're driving me insane." Her mother's voice, usually so soft, rose in defiance. "And I've had enough of your cruelty. Do you even care about your family anymore?" Her words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Marilyn's eyes welled with tears as she watched her parents from the shadows. Her mother's face was pale, her eyes hollow. The toll of the constant conflict was evident. The once vibrant woman now appeared frail, a mere shadow of her former self. Her father's indifference only fueled the fire, deepening the chasm between them. As the years passed, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly oppressive. Marilyn's mother began to withdraw, spending long hours in her room, her health deteriorating rapidly. Marilyn would often find her lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, her once lively eyes now dull and lifeless. One cold, grey morning, Marilyn awoke to an eerie silence. She tiptoed to her mother's room, her heart heavy with dread. There, she found her mother, lifeless, her face peaceful in death. The grief that enveloped Marilyn was suffocating. At her mother's funeral, she clutched the locket that had once belonged to her, holding it close to her heart. It was a symbol of her mother's unfulfilled dreams and a promise Marilyn made to herself to keep those dreams alive. The days following her mother's death were a blur of sorrow and confusion. Her father, unable or unwilling to provide the comfort she needed, grew even more distant. The house felt colder, emptier. It wasn't long before a new presence entered their lives. Her stepmother. The woman was a stark contrast to Marilyn's mother. Cold, authoritative and dismissive, she moved into the house with an air of entitlement. Marilyn's apprehension was immediate. She watched as her stepmother rearranged the furniture, discarded her mother's belongings, and imposed new rules with little regard for Marilyn's feelings. "Marilyn, do this. Marilyn, do that." Her stepmother's voice grated on her nerves. There was no warmth, no compassion in her tone. Marilyn found herself retreating to her small, cluttered room more often, seeking refuge in her books. They became her escape, a window into worlds far removed from her own troubled existence. Despite the chaos and hostility around her, Marilyn remained determined. She threw herself into her studies, her eyes always on the prize of a brighter future. Her dreams of marriage, influenced by her mother's words, were now intertwined with a desire for stability and escape from the oppressive environment she was forced to endure. Her stepmother's dismissive behavior only fueled her resolve. Each command, each cold remark was met with silent defiance. Marilyn's room, though small and cluttered, became her sanctuary. The walls were lined with books, each one a stepping stone towards the life she envisioned for herself. The years of study paid off. Marilyn secured a scholarship to a prestigious medical school, a milestone that marked the beginning of her journey towards independence. The day she received her acceptance letter, she retreated to her room, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She traced the embossed letters with trembling fingers, a small smile playing on her lips. The stepmother's words echoed faintly, but they were drowned out by the roar of her own dreams. On the eve of her departure, Marilyn stood in her cluttered room, her belongings packed neatly into a single suitcase. She looked around, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the worn-out rug, and the books that had been her faithful companions. A sense of bittersweet nostalgia washed over her. She was leaving behind a life of struggle, stepping into a future filled with promise. As she closed the door behind her, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The college campus buzzed with life. Students rushed between classes, their conversations blending into a symphony of youthful energy. Marilyn, her books clutched to her chest, navigated the crowd with a quiet determination. She had always been shy, preferring the company of her textbooks over the noise of social gatherings. It was during one of these solitary walks that she first saw John. He was seated on a bench in the quad, strumming his guitar with a casual ease that drew a crowd. His tall, lean figure and brown eyes made him the center of attention, his fingers dancing over the strings with practiced skill. Marilyn found herself slowing down, her eyes drawn to him, despite herself. She lingered at the edge of the gathering, her heart fluttering as she watched him play. There was something magnetic about him, an effortless charm that seemed to captivate everyone around him. Yet he appeared oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on the music. Days turned into weeks, and Marilyn continued to watch John from a distance. He was always surrounded by admirers, girls who giggled at his jokes and boys who envied his talent. Marilyn, with her modest demeanor and unassuming presence, felt invisible in comparison. One afternoon, as she sat under a tree with her notebook, she glanced up to see John walking by. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment, Marilyn's heart skipped a beat. He nodded at her, a polite acknowledgement that made her cheeks flush. It was a small gesture, but it lingered in her mind, sparking a flicker of hope. One rainy afternoon, as Marilyn huddled under the awning of the library, John approached her. "Forgot your umbrella?" he asked, offering her a spot under his. She nodded, too shy to speak, and they walked together in companionable silence. Marilyn's friends noticed the change in her. "You've got a crush on him, don't you?" they teased, nudging her playfully. Marilyn would smile and shake her head, but the blush on her cheeks betrayed her true feelings. Their connection deepened through letters and phone calls. John had graduated and moved back to his hometown, but they kept in touch, their conversations a lifeline for Marilyn. She would wait eagerly for his letters, her heart racing as she opened each envelope. His words were a window into his world, filled with humor, warmth, and a growing affection that mirrored her own. On weekends, Marilyn would travel to John's hometown. She stepped off the bus, her modest attire a stark contrast to the lively, vibrant environment of John's world. He would be there, waiting for her, with a smile that made the long trip fade into insignificance. Their weekends together were a blend of discovery and companionship. John introduced her to his family, their warm welcome easing her nerves. They explored the town, shared meals, and spent quiet evenings talking about their dreams and fears. Marilyn felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. Yet, beneath the surface, hints of trouble began to emerge. John's carefree nature sometimes clashed with Marilyn's more reserved personality. He enjoyed the attention of others, and while he never strayed, Marilyn couldn't help but feel a pang of insecurity. During one visit, as they strolled through the town, Marilyn noticed a group of girls watching John with admiration. He waved at them, his usual charming self, and Marilyn felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She forced a smile, but the unease lingered. John's indifference towards her concerns began to show. "You worry too much," he would say, brushing off her feelings with a laugh. Marilyn tried to push aside her doubts, focusing on the moments of happiness they shared. Their relationship continued to grow, but the seeds of tension had been planted. As Marilyn returned to her campus each Sunday evening, she carried with her the memories of their weekends together. The letters and phone calls continued, but the distance between them seemed to grow. The day Marilyn married John was simple, yet filled with her heartfelt joy. The modest ceremony took place in a small chapel, adorned with modest but carefully chosen flowers. Marilyn's face radiated happiness as she walked down the aisle, but a closer look at John revealed distant eyes and a forced smile. He seemed present in body, but absent in spirit. Their first home was a cozy studio apartment, and Marilyn poured her heart into decorating it. She chose warm colors, hung pictures on the walls, and placed soft cushions on the old sofa. "What do you think?" she asked John eagerly, after arranging the last of the flowers she had bought from the local market. "It's nice," John replied with a nonchalant shrug, barely glancing up from his phone. His lukewarm response stung, but Marilyn pushed the feeling aside, convincing herself he was just tired from work. Months passed, and the small apartment filled with the routines of married life. One evening, Marilyn decided to share her big news. "John," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, "I'm pregnant." John looked up from his dinner, fork midway to his mouth. "Oh," he said flatly. "That's unexpected." "Unexpected?" Marilyn echoed, her heart sinking. She had hoped for joy, for an embrace, for shared excitement. Instead, she got indifference. As her pregnancy progressed, Marilyn's morning sickness became a constant companion. She felt isolated, spending her days alone while John increasingly found reasons to stay out late. "Work is hectic," he'd say, but Marilyn noticed the lingering smell of alcohol and perfume on his clothes. One evening, as she lay curled up on the sofa, nausea and loneliness washing over her, she confronted him. "John, we need to talk." John sighed, not looking at her. "Marilyn, I'm doing my best. Can't you see that? Work is demanding." "But we're supposed to be a team," she insisted, tears brimming in her eyes. He stood up abruptly, grabbing his jacket. "I can't do this right now," he muttered, leaving the apartment. The door closed with a finality that echoed in the small space. The strain on their relationship only deepened. Marilyn's days became a blur of doctor's appointments and solitude, while John's absences grew longer. Her excitement for their baby girl was tempered by the growing chasm between them. When Amy was born, for a fleeting moment, Marilyn hoped things would change. John was there, holding their newborn daughter with a softness she hadn't seen in months. "She's beautiful," he whispered, and for a brief second, Marilyn believed everything would be okay. But the reprieve was short-lived. Sleepless nights and the relentless demands of a newborn quickly took their toll. John's initial interest faded, replaced by irritation and avoidance. He would come home late, and when he did, he seemed like a stranger. One night, Marilyn found him in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. "John, we need to talk about us. About Amy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. John didn't turn to look at her. "What's there to talk about? I'm here, aren't I?" "You're not," Marilyn replied, her frustration bubbling over. "You're here, but you're not really here. I need you. Amy needs you." He finally turned, his eyes cold. "I never signed up for this," he said, his words like a dagger. "You wanted a family, Marilyn, not me." The truth hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Marilyn felt the weight of his words crushing her hopes. Marilyn woke up one morning to find a note on the kitchen table. John's handwriting was scrawled hastily across the paper. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. Goodbye." The words blurred as she blinked back tears. She glanced around the empty apartment, its silence a stark reminder of her isolation. Amy's soft whimper from the crib drew her back to reality. She scooped up her daughter, holding her tightly. "I promise I'll protect you," she whispered, her voice cracking. The days that followed were a whirlwind of exhaustion and resilience. Marilyn's routine revolved around Amy's needs. The baby's cries echoed through the small apartment, punctuating the hours with demands for food, comfort, and attention. Marilyn moved through the motions with a weary determination, her eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. Financial strain loomed large. The bills piled up, and the meager savings dwindled. Marilyn found herself rationing groceries and turning off lights to save on electricity. Every dollar counted. She considered reaching out to friends for help, but pride and a lingering sense of shame held her back. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marilyn made a decision. She packed a small suitcase, gathered Amy's essentials, and took a deep breath. Returning to her father's house was her only option, though it was far from ideal. The reunion was as tense as she had feared. Her father opened the door, surprise and discomfort flickering across his face. "Marilyn," he said, his voice flat, "I wasn't expecting you." "I had nowhere else to go, Dad," she replied, her grip tightening on the suitcase. Amy stirred in her arms, sensing her mother's unease. From behind her father, the stepmother's sharp gaze pierced through the dim light of the hallway. "How long are you planning to stay?" she asked, her tone laced with displeasure. Marilyn swallowed hard. "Just until I get back on my feet. It won't be long." The stepmother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine, but don't expect us to cater to your every need." Marilyn's heart sank, but she forced a nod. She followed her father inside, the air heavy with unspoken tension. The house felt foreign, its once familiar walls now cold and unwelcoming. Marilyn's old room was barely recognizable, filled with storage boxes and dusty furniture. She cleared a small space for the air mattress, laying Amy down gently. Days turned into weeks, and the stepmother's hostility became a constant backdrop. She made no effort to hide her disdain, her passive-aggressive remarks cutting deeper than outright confrontation. "Maybe you should look for a job," she'd say, her eyes narrowed. "Contributing something would be nice." Marilyn bit back her retorts, focusing on Amy. The baby's innocent smiles and laughter were her anchor. She spent her days caring for Amy, cleaning the house and searching for work. Her father remained largely silent, caught between his wife's displeasure and his daughter's desperation. One night, as Marilyn prepared a simple dinner, she overheard a hushed conversation from the living room. "She can't stay here forever," the stepmother hissed. "This isn't her home anymore." Her father's response was muffled, but his tone lacked conviction. "Give her some time. She has nowhere else to go." "Time? We're not running a charity?" the stepmother snapped. "She needs to leave." Marilyn's resolve hardened. She couldn't subject Amy to this toxic environment. The next morning, she packed their belongings, her movements deliberate and final. She cradled Amy in one arm and carried the suitcase with the other. As she stepped into the living room, her father looked up, his expression a mix of guilt and relief. "I'm leaving," Marilyn said quietly. "Thank you for letting us stay." The stepmother said nothing, her silence a cold dismissal. Marilyn turned to the door, her father's weak protest trailing off as she closed it behind her. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on her, but her resolve was unshaken. She walked through the familiar streets, each step taking her further from the life she had known. There was fear, yes, but also a flicker of hope. She would build a new life for herself and Amy, free from the shadows of abandonment and hostility. Many days later, she moved to her grandmother's house. Marilyn stood at the gate of her grandmother's house, the old hinges creaking in the early morning stillness. The house looked the same, modest, with a neatly kept garden and a weathered front porch. It was a stark contrast to the hostile environment she had just left behind. Taking a deep breath, she opened the gate and walked up the path, Amy cradled in her arms. Her grandmother, Mrs. Spurrell, emerged from the house, her eyes widening in surprise before filling with warmth. "Marilyn, my dear, you're here!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. She wrapped Marilyn in a tight embrace, then stepped back to look at her. "And this must be Amy. Oh, how beautiful she is." Marilyn felt the weight of her journey lift slightly. "Hi, Grandma. We need a place to stay, just for a while." Mrs. Spurrell nodded, her eyes softening with understanding. "Of course, my dear. You're always welcome here." She took Marilyn's suitcase and led them inside, the warmth of the house enveloping them like a comforting blanket. Rural life was a significant change from the urban bustle Marilyn had grown accustomed to. The first few days were a whirlwind of adjustments, learning to garden, feeding the chickens, and helping with household chores. Her grandmother was patient, guiding her with gentle hands and kind words. "Just like this, Marilyn. See? It's not so hard," she would say, showing her how to tend the plants or care for the animals. Marilyn found a surprising peace in these simple tasks. The rhythm of rural life, the fresh air, and the quiet beauty of the countryside brought her a sense of satisfaction she hadn't felt in years. She and her grandmother would spend hours working side by side, their conversations flowing easily. They shared stories and laughter, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. In this new environment, Amy thrived. She played outside in the garden, her laughter ringing through the air as she chased butterflies and explored the world around her. She bonded with her great-grandmother, who delighted in teaching her about the plants and animals. The change in Amy was palpable. She grew healthier, happier, and more curious about her surroundings. One afternoon, as Marilyn watched Amy play, she felt a sense of contentment she hadn't known before. Her grandmother joined her on the porch, handing her a cup of tea. "You're doing well, Marilyn. I can see it in your eyes," she said, her voice filled with pride. Marilyn smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "It's because of you, Grandma. This place, it's healing us." Mrs. Spurrell patted her hand. "We all need a sanctuary, my dear, a place to find our strength and rebuild our lives." As the weeks turned into months, Marilyn's transformation continued. She found a sense of purpose in her daily tasks, a quiet joy in the simplicity of rural living. Her confidence grew, and she began to see the future with new eyes. She no longer felt like a burden or a failure. Instead, she felt strong, capable, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Marilyn and her grandmother shared countless bonding moments. They cooked together, preserving fruits and vegetables for the winter. They laughed over old family photos, reminiscing about the past. Each day, their connection deepened, and Marilyn felt a renewed sense of belonging. Amy's growth was a constant source of joy. She learned to walk and talk, her first words bringing tears to Marilyn's eyes. She was surrounded by love and care, her great-grandmother's stories and wisdom enriching her young life. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Marilyn turned to her grandmother. "Thank you, Grandma, for everything. I don't know what we would have done without you." Mrs. Spurrell smiled, her eyes twinkling with affection. "Family is everything, Marilyn. We take care of each other. That's what matters." Marilyn nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She knew that this sanctuary had given her the strength to rebuild her life, to find hope and happiness once again. And as she looked at Amy, playing happily at their feet, she felt a surge of determination. They would face the future together, with love and resilience, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Marilyn noticed the change in her grandmother. Mrs. Spurrell, once so lively and energetic, now took frequent rests. Her breathing labored after simple tasks. The garden that had always been her pride now seemed too demanding for her weakening hands. Marilyn's worry grew as she watched the once vibrant woman slowly fade. "Grandma, maybe you should see a doctor," Marilyn suggested one afternoon, her voice tinged with concern as they sat together on the porch. Mrs. Spurrell waved a dismissive hand, but her eyes betrayed her fatigue. "I'm just getting old, dear. No doctor can change that." Marilyn didn't push further, but she took on more of the household duties, her heart heavy with the knowledge that time was slipping away. She cooked meals, tended the garden, and kept the house in order, all while keeping a close eye on her grandmother. Their final conversations were bittersweet. As the days grew shorter, Mrs. Spurrell seemed to sense her time was near. One evening, as the sun cast a golden glow over the fields, she called Marilyn to her bedside. "Marilyn, come here," she said softly, her voice weak but steady. "There's something I need to give you." Marilyn sat beside her, taking her grandmother's frail hand in hers. Mrs. Spurrell reached for a small, carved wooden box on the nightstand. Inside was a beautiful antique ring, a gold band with a large ruby set in the center. "This ring has been in our family for generations," Mrs. Spurrell began, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "My great-grandmother received it as a gift from her husband. It's a symbol of love and resilience. I want you to have it." Marilyn took the ring, the weight of it both physical and emotional. "Thank you, Grandma. I'll cherish it always." Mrs. Spurrell smiled, a tired but content expression on her face. "Remember, Marilyn, family is everything. Take care of Amy and yourself. Be strong, my dear." The next morning, Marilyn found her grandmother had passed peacefully in her sleep. The house felt unbearably quiet, the emptiness echoing through the halls. She sat by the bedside, holding the ring tightly, her grief a raw, aching presence in her heart. The days following her grandmother's death were a blur of arrangements and condolences. Marilyn moved through them in a daze, her focus solely on ensuring her grandmother received the dignified farewell she deserved. The small community came together, offering support and sharing in the sorrow. As she stood by the graveside, Amy clinging to her leg, Marilyn felt the weight of her new reality settle over her. The ring on her finger felt like a lifeline, a tangible connection to the strength and love her grandmother had imparted. In the weeks that followed, Marilyn found solace in the routines her grandmother had taught her. She maintained the household, tended the garden, and cared for Amy with a renewed sense of purpose. The ring served as a constant reminder of her grandmother's wisdom and the legacy of resilience she had inherited. Life in the old house took on a new rhythm. It was not without its challenges, but Marilyn faced each day with a sense of purpose. She found strength in the memories of her grandmother's gentle guidance, in the laughter of her daughter, and in the simple joys of rural life. The ring, once a symbol of the past, became a beacon of hope for the future. It reminded Marilyn of the unbreakable bond of family, the power of love, and the enduring strength that comes from facing life's trials with grace and determination. In honoring her grandmother's memory, Marilyn discovered her own resilience. She knew that whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the same quiet strength that had defined her grandmother's life. The night was drenched in rain, each drop hammering against the roof in a relentless symphony. Marilyn was putting Amy to bed when she heard the knock. She paused, her heart quickening. It was rare to have visitors this late, especially on such a stormy night. She glanced out the window, but the darkness and rain obscured her view. Holding Amy close, she approached the door cautiously. "Who could it be?" she murmured, mostly to herself. Another knock, more urgent this time. "Just a minute," she called out, setting Amy in her crib. She opened the door to find a drenched boy, no older than 7, his eyes wide with fear. "Please, Mom," he stammered. "My dad, he's really sick. He needs help." Marilyn's concern overrode her caution. "Come in. You're soaked," she said, ushering the boy inside. "What's your name?" "Alan," he replied, shivering. "Where's your father, Alan?" Marilyn asked, grabbing a blanket to wrap around him. "Just down the road. Our car broke down. He's having trouble breathing." Marilyn's medical training kicked in. "Stay here," she said firmly. "I'll be right back." She grabbed her first aid kit and an umbrella, then turned to Amy. "Be good for a little while, sweetheart. Mommy will be right back." She followed Alan to the car, where she found his father, Daniel, slumped in the front seat, struggling to breathe. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue. "Asthma?" she asked, quickly assessing the situation. Daniel nodded weakly. Marilyn worked swiftly, administering the inhaler she carried in her kit. She stayed by his side, her presence steady and calming. Slowly, his breathing eased, the color returning to his face. "Thank you," Daniel whispered, his voice strained but grateful. "We need to get you inside," Marilyn said. With Alan's help, they managed to support Daniel back to the house. Inside, she settled him on the couch, draping a warm blanket over him. "Stay here tonight," she said. "It's too dangerous to drive in this weather, and you need to rest." "Thank you," Daniel repeated, his eyes filled with genuine gratitude. "I don't know what we would have done without you." As Daniel rested, Marilyn prepared a simple meal. Alan, now dry and warm, sat at the table, his eyes wide with curiosity. "You're really nice," he said. Marilyn smiled. "Just doing what anyone would. How's your dad feeling?" "Better, thanks to you," Alan replied, his voice filled with relief. Once Daniel had recovered enough to speak, Marilyn joined him on the couch. They talked quietly, sharing their stories. Daniel's tale was strikingly similar to hers: loss, betrayal, and the struggle to build a new life for his son. "My wife left us," he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "I thought we were happy, but she found someone else." Marilyn nodded, understanding his pain. "It's hard, being left behind, but you find a way to move forward." Daniel looked at her, his eyes reflecting a shared resilience. "Yes, you do." Their conversation flowed naturally, each word building a bridge between their lives. Marilyn felt a connection she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of understanding and mutual respect. Meanwhile, Amy and Alan played together, their laughter filling the house. Marilyn watched them, a soft smile on her lips. The innocence of their bond was a stark contrast to the complexities of adult life. As the night wore on, Daniel and Marilyn shared more stories, their experiences weaving together in a tapestry of resilience and hope. They exchanged smiles and lingering glances, each one hinting at the possibility of something more. "Thank you for everything," Daniel said quietly as the fire burned low. "You've given us more than just shelter. You've given us hope." The storm outside began to subside, but inside, a new connection was forming. Marilyn felt a sense of peace, knowing that despite the challenges they faced, there was always room for kindness, love, and the possibility of new beginnings. Marilyn was preparing dinner when she heard a knock at the door. The sun had just set, and the house was bathed in the warm glow of evening light. Amy played quietly in the corner, her laughter a soft backdrop to the peaceful scene. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Marilyn's heart skipped a beat as she wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the door. She opened it to find John standing on the porch, his eyes wild and desperate. Her breath caught in her throat. "John? What are you doing here?" He pushed past her into the house. "Where's the ring, Marilyn?" Marilyn's protective instincts flared. She stepped between John and Amy, who was watching the scene unfold with wide, frightened eyes. "Get out of my house, John. You have no right to be here." John's face twisted in anger. "I need that ring, Marilyn. You don't understand. I owe people. Dangerous people. They'll kill me if I don't pay them back." Marilyn's heart pounded. She had always feared this day might come, but she hadn't expected it to be so soon. "I don't have the ring, John. Even if I did, I wouldn't give it to you." John's eyes darkened, and he took a step closer. "Don't lie to me. I saw you wearing it. Hand it over, or I'll make you regret it." Amy began to cry, the tension in the room overwhelming her. Marilyn scooped her up, holding her tightly. "Please, John, leave us alone. Think about your daughter." But John was beyond reason. "I'm not leaving without that ring." He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the fireplace. An idea seemed to form in his mind, and he turned back to Marilyn with a sinister smile. "You're not giving me much choice." Marilyn's fear turned to terror as John grabbed the fire poker and began swinging it wildly. "Stop it, John! You're scaring Amy!" John ignored her, his swings becoming more erratic. "Give me the ring, or I'll burn this place to the ground." Marilyn's mind raced. She needed to get Amy to safety, but how? Just then the front door burst open and Daniel charged in. "Marilyn, what's going on?" John turned, the fire poker still in his hand. "Stay out of this, whoever you are. This is between me and her." Daniel didn't flinch. "Put the poker down. You don't want to do this." John laughed bitterly. "What do you know about what I want? She has something that belongs to me." Daniel stepped forward, his eyes locked on John's. "She doesn't owe you anything. You need to leave. Now." John's grip tightened on the poker. "Make me." In an instant, Daniel lunged at John. The two men grappled, the poker clattering to the floor. Marilyn watched in horror, clutching Amy tightly. The struggle was fierce, each man fueled by desperation and determination. Daniel managed to pin John to the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Call the police, Marilyn!" With shaking hands, Marilyn dialed 911. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she relayed the situation to the operator. Finally, the sound of sirens filled the air, and moments later, the police arrived, bursting through the door. The officers quickly subdued John, who was still struggling against Daniel's hold. They hauled him to his feet and cuffed him, reading him his rights. As they led him away, John cast a final, hateful glance at Marilyn. This isn't over. Marilyn slumped against the wall, exhaustion washing over her. Amy clung to her, her small body trembling with fear. Daniel approached, his face bruised and his shirt torn. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Marilyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Daniel. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." Daniel wrapped his arms around her and Amy, holding them close. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." The police finished taking statements and left, the house finally quiet. Marilyn looked around, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. The immediate danger was over, but the emotional scars would take time to heal. As she sat down, holding Amy close, Marilyn felt a sense of relief. John was gone, and they were safe. She glanced at Daniel, gratitude and something deeper in her eyes. He had been there when she needed him most, and for that, she was profoundly thankful. The days following John's arrest were a blur of recovery and reflection for Marilyn and Daniel. The shock of the confrontation lingered, but gradually, the warmth of their quiet moments together began to soothe the raw edges of their fear. One sunny afternoon, the four of them sat in the garden. Amy and Alan played a game of tag, their laughter mingling with the rustling leaves. Marilyn watched them, a soft smile on her face. Daniel, seated beside her, reached for her hand. "They're good for each other, aren't they?" he remarked. Marilyn nodded, squeezing his hand gently. "Yes, they are. It's like they were always meant to be siblings." The bond between Marilyn and Daniel deepened with each passing day. They shared more of their pasts, their hopes, and their fears. Marilyn opened up about her struggles, and Daniel listened with a patience and understanding that she had never known. In return, Daniel confided in her, sharing the pain of his wife's betrayal and the challenges of single fatherhood. One evening, as they walked through the village, Daniel turned to Marilyn. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant, "about us, about the future." Marilyn looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What about the future?" "I want us to be a family," he said, his eyes earnest. "You, me, Amy, and Alan. Together." Marilyn's breath caught in her throat. The simplicity and sincerity of his words touched her deeply. "I want that too," she whispered. The villagers rallied around Marilyn, their kindness and support a balm to her wounded spirit. Neighbors brought meals, offered to watch the children, and lent a hand with the chores. The sense of community was strong, a network of care and compassion that embraced her and her family. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear. It was a simple ceremony held in the village chapel. Friends and family gathered, their smiles and well-wishes filling the air with a sense of joy and celebration. Marilyn wore her grandmother's ring, a symbol of love and continuity. As she walked down the aisle, her heart swelled with gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. Daniel stood at the altar, his eyes fixed on her with a look of love and admiration. When she reached his side, he took her hand, and together they exchanged vows that spoke of hope, commitment, and the promise of a new beginning. After the ceremony, they celebrated in the garden, the tables laden with food and flowers. Laughter and music filled the air as the children played, their joy a testament to the new family that had been formed. Marilyn felt a sense of contentment that she had never known, a deep, abiding happiness that came from the love and support of those around her. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Marilyn and Daniel stood together, watching Amy and Alan play. "We've come a long way," Marilyn said softly, leaning into Daniel's embrace. "We have," Daniel agreed, his arms wrapping around her. "And we have so much to look forward to." Marilyn looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "Thank you for being there for us," she said, "for believing in us." Daniel kissed her forehead. "Always, Marilyn. Always." The future stretched out before them, filled with hope and possibility. They had faced danger and betrayal, but through it all, they had found love and kindness. As they watched their children play, their laughter filling the air, Marilyn felt a profound sense of gratitude. They were a family, bound together by love and resilience, ready to face whatever the future held. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this story unfold. I hope you found it as touching and emotional as I did while writing it. You know, I firmly believe that God always blesses those who do good. Remember, happiness will come to those who persist and stay true to their values. Story reminds us all to keep faith, to keep doing good, and to trust that even in our darkest times, there is a light guiding us toward a brighter future. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming heartwarming and inspiring stories. Your support means the world to me and helps me continue creating content that we can all connect with. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay blessed, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next video.